So I'd like to start with one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite books. So does anyone know who she is? All right, who is she? All right, so she's the Red Queen. And the Red Queen is a character from Alice in Wonderland. And the reason I like her, she's known as the person who runs faster and faster, but stays in the same place. And I found her to be a very apt analogy for a lot of business activities. So, I ask you, have you guys ever experienced that? Where you run faster and faster, right? So we're often told, do more with less. Run faster, try harder. Sound familiar? Yeah, all right, so somewhat familiar. That's why I use her a lot. Now, it's interesting, because when you find that you're running the Red Queen race, you really only have three choices to make. Choice number one, you could ignore her, right? Say, oh, I don't have to pay any attention to this. Number two, you could try to outrun her, right? So you run faster and faster. So in today's world, just take a look at this conference today. One of the things that we're running after, that we're all running after, is get me more digital stuff, right? Get me more innovation stuff, right? Get me more of this stuff. Get me more of this digital business stuff. But here's a question for you. If everyone is getting the same stuff, get me digital, get me innovation, get me more digital business, what's going to be different in a couple of years? Right? So again, that's an example of we're running faster and faster, but staying in the same place. So the question is, if the options are A, you could ignore her, 2, you could try to outrace her, but the problem with outracing her, if you remember your Greek history, in heroes, right? Heroes are the people who run faster and faster. What tends to happen to heroes? They die, right? So maybe this running faster and faster is not a very sustainable business model. So the question then is, you have to do something different, right? So what do you do? So the purpose of today's session is talk a little bit about what are some of those new models about doing different and what can we learn from them? So let me ask, so what are some of the big, fastest, most explosive growth models that you pay attention to? Any in particular? Well, here's a question for you. What's common to Tencent or Tesla, Alibaba or Amazon? What Schneider Electric has done and what General Electric is trying to do? What's common to these different industries, different parts of the world, but there's something common underlying all of them? This is what's common to them. So what does that mean? So an accounting firm about a year ago did an analysis of the different type of business models that made up the Fortune 500, so the largest companies on the planet. And they categorized them according to the different business models as measured by the market value that they were creating. And they broke them into different categories. I won't bore you with the other categories, but the explosive growth companies that included Tencent and Tesla and Alibaba and Amazon and so on, all shared a common very large market multiple compared to everybody else. It was up to 8 times the market multiple of any other company out there. So the question is, what's common to them? And what they called these firms, they called them ecosystem-centric business models. Now that's a mouthful, right? It's really a mouthful. And so this concept of ecosystem is a hot topic out there. A lot of people are talking about it today. And for many, it means a marketing term, right? So it's justification for consultants to charge you more money, right? But actually, there's something very pragmatic to it. So let me give you an example. So Jeff and I, we used to work in Africa. And so when we first landed in Africa, we had the privilege of working on a very, very hard problem. And the hard problem, and I used to run strategy overall for the region. And so the problem was, I'm a father of a family. I have no money to pay for food for my family until Friday. That's the problem. So what do you do about that? 2 options. We work with 2 different types of organizations. One was Africa's fastest growing bank. And they approached the problem the way that you would expect them to approach. They looked at the value chain. They cut the cost basis of each of the value chains. They repackaged it and delivered it as a service, as a microloan service to the customers. Classic approach. And as a result, after 6 months, they were delivering 1,500 of these new loans a week. Not bad. The other approach, though, an ecosystem-centric approach, was different. Take the same problem, and what we looked at then is what are the underlying capabilities necessary to solve the problem? Well, one of the capabilities you need is to know where you can go buy goods. So we partnered with Tiger Foods, which is Africa's largest supply chain of foods. The second capability they needed, though, was what? They didn't have money. How are you going to pay for food if you don't have money? Any ideas? What's that? Labor's a possibility. I'm going to give you a hint. In Africa, there's 1.2 cell phones per person. So what's on a cell phone that could be used to acquire something? Minutes. Mobile minutes. So that required going to Africa's largest telco company and say, look, we want to partner with you to deliver these type of services. Now, why would a telco be willing to partner with a startup in this area? Well, it's because telcos, as we all know, have a common challenge of how do you get more money for data? Because they face a strategic problem in terms of what's known as the JAWS chart, which is a lot of money, revenue can come from data, not a lot of money from voice. So they need to figure out how they can pump more volume through the data channels, right? So they partnered with us. Now what happened, Julian's business was orchestrated the capabilities from different partners in service of this problem. At the end of 6 weeks, he was delivering 1,500 of these new loans a day as opposed to a week. In a year, he had 80,000 customers. In 15 months, he had 8 million, and now he has 30 million customers, and he's on the way to 100 million customers. So think about that for a second, because I'm trying to make an example, very pragmatic, what the difference of these models are. The bank point of view looked at it from the perspective of the bank, and they said, how do I cut the cost of my supply chain? And they got the results they got, 1,500 a week or so. Julian's was, how do you orchestrate the capabilities from different partners in which all the partners will get value in service of this? Now, so a business ecosystem is the orchestration of capabilities from different entities, different organizations in service of capturing value. Whether it's Julian or whether it's Amazon or Alibaba or Tesla or Tencent, it's the same business model. And that's what's different now today about these new business models that's driving this type of explosive market multiple. So what are pragmatic lessons that we can take from this? There are a couple that I'll mention. Number one, each of these business models rests on what we call a new strategic question. You know, we've all dealt with strategy before, right? And strategy, of course, deals with the same common questions. Where do I grow? How do I cut cost? How do I shape the market to my value propositions? Traditional approaches. The new strategic question based on the explosive growth company starts in a different place. The new question of today is where's value being created and destroyed in the ecosystem in which I'm engaged, and what role do I play within it to capture it? So that requires a change in the unit of focus from you as company, you as your industry, to the ecosystem in which you're engaged. So we're seeing that all over the place, whether it's the explosive growth companies or even within industries. A year ago, the automobile industry has a big annual conference every year out of Detroit in the US. And every one of the CEOs of the large manufacturers stood up and said, we are no longer automobile companies. Do you know what they said? We are now mobility companies, right? So the point now, it's an interesting concept because, again, it's reflecting that their ecosystem has fundamentally changed, requiring a new set of capabilities around which to capture new sources of value. So the new question is, again, where's value being created and destroyed in my ecosystem, and what do I do about it? Now that has massive implications in terms of what are those new foundations of value. Because what made you successful before is not going to make you successful tomorrow. So a phrase we use a lot is businesses are often optimized for a world that no longer exists. So let me give you a really tangible example here. Has anyone here heard of Walmart? A little company? Anyone heard of Amazon? a little bit bigger company, right? So Walmart acquired Jet.com recently, right? Not too long ago. And the foundations of value, the way to grab value in the retail industry is, one of the foundations is around speed, right? Get it done quickly, get whatever you purchase to the door really quickly. Another one, so let's call that a value foundation. Another one is convenience. Make it really simple to buy things. So Walmart was behind in these areas. So they bought Jet.com to build the capability to get speed and convenience for their customer. And that was the justification for the acquisition. That was great for yesterday's battle. However, Amazon is they have a new foundation of value right now. It has nothing to do, right? They've already owned the space of speed and convenience. The new foundation of value is enablement. Now, what does that mean? So if you think about what Alexa is fundamentally at Amazon, Alexa is to B2C what AWS, Amazon Web Services, is to the B2B side. It's the same business model, fundamentally. So what does Alexa allow you to do? It's an open set of standards that allows you different type of products to come in. You can order through it, and Amazon is going to take a percentage off of any transaction that goes through it, which is what? It's the same model as the AWS model on the B2B side. So while Walmart and Jet.com are fighting yesterday's battle, Amazon has completely shifted the battle. And that's what this is. You get that type of insight by getting clarity on what is the new, what is the ecosystem, where's it changing, and consequently, what role do you play within it? So that's one lesson. Change the unit of focus to an ecosystem in which you are engaged, and recognizing that has implications on new foundations. Another one, the new 20%. So what does that mean? What we've found and what the explosive growth companies are teaching us is that the capabilities that you have today that made you wildly successful will not be the same as we need tomorrow. So we call it the new 20% needed to capture the 70% of new value tomorrow. And then the whole concept of what really is that 20%? Let me give you an example. We've all heard of Boeing, little company, has a few products. We fly a little bit in them. All right, that was a bad attempt at a joke. So 767s, one of their big planes, has over 3 million parts that make up a plane. Of the 3 million parts, they depend on approximately 800 suppliers to deliver those parts, right? There are 2 million lines of code necessary to fly an airplane. Of the 2 million, 200,000 of those lines of code involve the cockpit, orchestrating operations in the cockpit. Of those 200,000 lines of code, 20,000 lines of code deal with sensor and radars. Of those, 200 lines of code orchestrate the APIs, which are necessary in order to orchestrate all of the code to fly the planes. Now, when Boeing did an analysis of that, they found out that those 200 lines of code, now you can imagine that those 200 lines of code are pretty important, right? If those 200 lines of code aren't working, the plane's not working. There's no value being created whatsoever. They did analysis and found out that those 200 lines of code were actually being developed and delivered to Boeing from one of their suppliers out of Japan. So think about that. The fundamental source of value to keep the plane up and running was being orchestrated by someone outside of their control. When they found that out, you can imagine they got very nervous. And so very, very, incredibly nervous. So they had to figure, look, if that's our new source of value, our new 20%, we better make sure that we are in control of that new 20%. So this whole issue of these new models is changing, has huge implications of what is that new 20% for you? We're working with a large insurance company, and the chief strategy officer, when we were going through this example of Boeing, we actually had the Boeing in a workshop with us, and he said, holy moly, when he was thinking about the new 20%, he said, insurance is fundamentally about what? It's about managing a book of risk, right? He said, what happens in the new world when the business is not around managing risk, but it's about preventing accidents? He said, we have built our whole 70-year heritage on managing a book of risk. But the new 20% is different now. It's shifting. What does that mean for us? These are the type of questions that that we have to wrestle with, and that these explosive growth companies are thinking through. Figuring out what is that new 20%, and then orchestrating the other capabilities, like I used the example from the African example, orchestrating the capabilities in service of the new value. New consumer engagement model, of course. In the consumer engagement model, it's interesting. When you talk about from an ecosystem point of view, it changes how we tend to apply and think about customer journeys and customer insight. The traditional approach, which we're all, no doubt many of us are dealing with. Is anyone here not talking about customer insight, customer journeys? Yeah, exactly, right? All right. But what does this mean from an ecosystem point of view? The traditional approach to customer insight is map out your process, right? Map out the process, understand where it touches the customer, and generation one of that is you take a look at that, you find your magic moments, your customer, so you can have better insight to develop a better customer experience. All good. However, if we're all doing this again, aren't we running the Red Queen race again? So what's going to be fundamentally different about what we're doing? So the third generation lesson learned from these other approaches is, how do you engage in the ecosystem in which your consumers are engaged, and what do you do about it? Let me make it really practical. So we've been working with one of the world's largest consumer products companies. It's a CEO-sponsored project, and this was our question. And so the problem he was facing was that the apparel industry that he happens to be in is driving, the global growth rate is 2.3%. And he was saying, look, this is not enough. This is a Red Queen phenomenon. I'm investing in digital. I'm investing in all innovation, all of this stuff. But the global growth rate is only 2.3%. Is there something else that I could possibly do? We went through this exercise with them, and I'll just focus on this part. The question was, what is the ecosystem in which our customers are engaged in? What do we do about it? Now remember, this is a product company, right? And the question, so when you're talking, and every company on the planet, from our experience, product companies are talking about what's the right blend between products and services. Services are talking about what's the right blend between services and products, right? So we're all kind of tied up in what does this mean for us? So Diego, the CEO of this company, is wrestling with the same thing. From the point of view of the customer, we said, all right, what are the ecosystems in which your customers are engaged in? And it was very clear. And so, look, they had all this data. They knew that many of their customers were musicians or budding musicians, or they were involved in the maker movement, which is the process by which we can do local manufacturing, right? And so we said, all right, let's look at the music industry and the music value chain. Is there a role that you can play in the music value chain that your customers are engaged in? What would that look like? Does it even make sense to do? Instead of looking at what are the products and services we sell them directly, it was your customers are involved in the music industry. What role could we perhaps play? What set of services might we offer within that? And what we found very quickly is there are particular areas that millions and millions of musicians, amateur musicians, kids, whatever, they look for is how do I find other musicians to play with? So one of the examples was there was this, so we took them on a listening tour around North America. And one of the musicians said, look, I'm a musician from LA. I would love to learn more about Ghanaian drum beats. How do I find out musicians in Ghana or other parts of the world? So we created basically a matching engine. So think of it as like the Amazon recommendation engine. We created a matching engine for these. And we created several of these type of services. So we created a new business model for them, products and a set of services that would engage the customers in the ecosystems that they engage with, in music, for example, in the maker movement. So this company we built this services platform to engage the consumers differently. That drives increasing demand for their products. Their increasing demand for their products led to more people involved with what other services might be relevant to me. Bottom line here, the industry average is at 2.3%. They are now growing at 7.8%, right? So again, if you just ask these questions differently from an ecosystem point of view, funny things start to happen. So these are some of the lessons that we're learning. So again, lessons, change the unit of focus, engage with them differently, implications on the 20% in business models. So in closing, So two of my favorite writers. It's interesting is that there's no one type of business ecosystem. There are different types. There are patterns, different business models to these ecosystems. So the question is, which one may be right for you? It depends. But the point is, there's not an infinite number of them. There are discrete ways to make sense of what type of model makes sense for you to engage with. Because again, the question is, where's value being created in this story in the ecosystem in which you're engaged? What role do you play within them, and what capabilities do you bring to the table to do so? What patterns exist in? And the other one, this is just starting, right? This whole thing about these new models, we passionately believe that this is the new competitive landscape in which we all live in right now. So, some lessons learned. That's that.